very clear, unlike most, not all, but most other countries, that in probably the last 10 years, your pasture harvest not just has been around that level, but has actually been increasing. And it'll be interesting to see if that momentum can be maintained in the future. But there'll be a limit based on the capacity of the industry and the weather and the fact you've got to put cows largely indoors over part of the winter and these sorts of things.
Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey and you're welcome to The Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's episode, international dairy consultant David Beca joins us to discuss the fundamental importance of analysis and benchmarking of your farm business to ensure you are maximising profitability and financial viability.
Yes, look, the interest always started with me from the aspect of wanting to run my own businesses soundly, and knowing that if you want to do that, you have to understand the drivers of any business you're involved with, whether it's farming, which I've primarily been involved with, but at times other businesses, software, and a range of agricultural type businesses, and always. Well, I realised that it was absolutely essential that I could analyse a business sufficiently to pull out what were the key drivers that I, as a manager of the business or people who I was working with, would concentrate on. And I guess from an early age believed it is, in fact, absolutely central. And it did mean over time I formed the view that the first thing, not the third or the fourth after, for instance, on a dairy farm, I'd got quite good maybe at pasture harvest. The first thing I wanted to know about any business I ran or anybody else was show me the numbers, show me the full financial and physical analysis of a business. And if I have that, then I can work out where to focus if it was my own business or somebody else's. And it was absolutely critical to being able to understand a business and drive it forward. And certainly in my working life, whether it's my own businesses or ones that I was invited into for some reason, it was always the first request. Give me that first, and we can work out where we should focus if we wanted to become more profitable.
It's interesting you say that, run your business, and it is a business, and I think we are becoming more aware and understanding of cost structures, decisions we make and how it impacts on our profit, but at the same time we probably have a lot to learn and a way to go on that. But interestingly, as part of the dairy conference, you have presented some international work, really nice comparisons between Ireland and our competitors internationally. But one interesting comment you make is that the costs or our costs of production are a risk to the business. So tell us a little bit more about that statement or thought that you have.
Okay, I'll firstly say that the number I want to calculate or ascertain to start with in any business will be the profit, and it sort of makes sense that that's going to always be the first number, but I'd highlight that profit is defined by return on capital. So for a farmer, it's interesting, potentially, the profit per hectare or per cow, but the core number that describes profit exactly is return on capital. And that's, in simple terms, really, is what, ignoring whether I lease or borrow money for a business, what's my operating profit, excluding any financing costs, and dividing that by the value of all the assets I have access to, whether I say I lease, own them, or the bank owns a fair chunk of them. But the second number then wants to be quite different. And the second number I'm after, which will tell me a different story to profit, is cost of production. And it's a critical number for a number of reasons. So it's describing something different to pure profit. And that profit number will go up or down with milk price and a whole range of factors. Cost of production should tell me what the cost is to produce, for instance, each kilo of milk solids or each litre. And it doesn't actually tell me how profitable I'm going to be, but it certainly tells me how resilient my business is, or and as you asked, what the risk would be. Because I know that if I have a higher cost of production, I'll have a smaller profit margin, and when the weather changes or the milk price changes, I'm going to be more exposed. And if I have a lower cost of production, then I'm more resilient. I can handle those. And for an industry, it's absolutely critical. So I come from Australia, I have to admit, where we struggle with both our rugby and our dairy industry. And our dairy industry has not concentrated on cost of production, has developed systems that were that concentrated more on cow production, and we no longer have an internationally competitive dairy industry. So although it's often hard to argue that anything's more important than firstly understanding how profitable you are, I actually rate cost of production equally important. And I actually believe it should be focused on as much as pure profit, because if you do, you'll build a business, a dairy business, and an industry that will stand the test of time, and be resilient and profitable in good and bad times. Less profitable in tough times when the milk price drops like it has, but still profitable.
And to you then, the key drivers, as you see it from your analysis, that are greatest linked to low cost of production and greatest profit? And I can say that I've done a lot of analysis and been very fortunate over the years. Because I believe so strongly in understanding businesses, I built software that farmers in multiple countries could use. So I've been very fortunate, and just through my working life, to see inside companies, but I mean see inside and farms of all forms, sizes, large or small, different countries, and see all their numbers, exactly how they're performing. So, but when I analyse that data, it's not as though it's new or different to what your researchers here and have analysed and produced, and not different to, say, in New Zealand, or not different to places that have also had access to this. And so it's not new, I think, for here, is that we know pasture harvest has easily the highest impact on profit. And usually pasture harvest, regardless of how much supplement you're using, is likely to explain around 40% of any change in profit, and there's no other factors that are much more than half as influential as that on profit. But when we look at cost of production, we change a bit. But higher pasture harvest will help you with a lower cost of production. But what drives cost of production is your production system. So easily the most influential impact on cost of production is the production system that you adopt, meaning the proportion of pasture that you have in the diet compared to supplements. And it dominates the influence on cost of production. And that's what underlines the huge strength I see here in the Irish industry and in the New Zealand industry is that generally the industries and all their research and a lot of the focus has been on how to, yes, increase pasture harvest, but critically to also maintain a very strong high percentage of pasture in the diet. And it means that those are the two countries that are most internationally competitive, and that you can demonstrate through any international comparisons. And just, I guess, to make sure we're all on the one page, your definition of pasture harvest?
I think it's a very good question because I'm noticing here that there's some lack of clarity around how to calculate some of the key ratios, and it's very good if that were to be the case. So firstly, pasture as a definition, a simple definition. So pasture, meaning this low-cost pasture that we're all after, the foundation definition is it means it's pasture that a cow can go and graze in situ. So no interference with machinery between her eating it. That's why it's low cost. It's not low cost if we introduce machinery to it. So pasture, and therefore pasture harvest, is pasture grown on your milking platform. of course, if there's too much for the cows to eat and you have to conserve it, that remains part of your pasture production. In fact, if it's any green feed, if you were to grow, a turnip crop, for instance, or something as part of your pasture renovation on the milking platform, that's actually part of your pasture production, but that's really key. So it means when you're importing, as a lot do here, and I understand it's linked to the way land is held here, but the fact that you often are importing grass, I'm not going to call it pasture, grass from your out farm back to the dairy farm, that's not part of your pasture harvest. It's not part of your pasture production. I mean, you're doing it because you hope it's a relatively low cost form of supplement, a forage supplement, but any reasonable calculations is going to work out that it'll be 2 or 3 times or more the cost of your pasture as I've defined it, and so it's a critical difference, and to make sure that when we're talking pasture and therefore pasture harvest and therefore pasture percentage in the diet, it's really the green feed, primarily grasses, but pasture that you're growing on the milking platform.
And I can see from the slides you present at the dairy conference that, Ireland is in and around 7.5 to 8 tonnes utilised based on your analysis, which I would say is very much in line with what I have seen Irish people present. Yes. So yep. Well done on that. You're spot on. But how does that compare with our international competitors? You mentioned New Zealand is strong, yep. But I suppose where are we at compared to them and others?
So the positive, I think, and really the only way I've tried to calculate it is based on your National Farm Survey and other data here. So I was hoping I would be not too much different to what is also being published or put out here locally. And I think the key, by the way, that I'll show is that it's very clear, unlike most, not all, but most other countries, that in probably the last 10 years, your pasture harvest not just has been around that level, but has actually been increasing. And it'll be interesting to see if that momentum can be maintained in the future. But there'll be a limit based on the capacity of the industry and the weather and the fact you've got to put cows largely indoors over part of the winter and these sorts of things. So it's an interesting. 7 or 8, and hopefully going up. That's when we look at elsewhere. New Zealand's probably around 12 tonne, give or take, and they haven't been improving that. What's interesting is most countries are not improving pasture harvest, and basically the idea is in any industry there can be lost opportunities which are suddenly picked up, and people get a bit smarter, and or in some countries they maybe had access to irrigation they didn't before, but disappointingly, you could say internationally, what tends to happen is as long as farmers are aware of the opportunity and encouraged and wish to secure it, they can lift it to a certain level. But we're not seeing, despite more or less nitrogen or a whole range of things, it's actually very disappointing when you look internationally at any, it's almost impossible to spot any year-on-year growth, even in very good focused industries like New Zealand. Australia's interesting. I still think we're a very interesting country because we have such a huge range. New Zealand and Ireland have very narrow climate variations in reality. So Australia's interesting to study for some good and some bad reasons, but part of it is we have a huge variation. So Tasmania, which is our only presently successful part of the industry, still growing, and it's of course got the kindest weather, the most rain, and it's probably up at 10 or 11 tonnes, so well ahead of you. Of course, there's no problem. Winter grows, and your cows are all out, and so it's more weather related. I'm not saying they're more skilled than Ireland at all. But then Victoria, the heart of the industry, might be around 7 or 8, and then some parts where there's poor, it's down at say 5 to 6. And very successful dairy industries and Uruguay and Argentina, for instance, are down around 5 to 6, and that's not because they're poor at doing this at all. I've lived and worked in some of those countries. But there's only a small amount of rain. It doesn't rain for best part of 5-6 months of the year. It's much tougher as you get close to the equator at being able to grow grass. So it's very easy to grow and maintain quality in Ireland and New Zealand. So there's this huge range. You're advantaged by the weather. It allows you to grow not just reasonably good amounts, but actually very cheaply compared to some other countries that have to irrigate, put on more nitrogen if they're allowed to, and do a range of other things.
And you mentioned the steady increase in utilisation over the last decade, and as you say, hopefully we'll continue on that trajectory. But I suppose there is a balance or a tipping point of getting grass utilisation right. And, on a very basic level, if you want to increase utilisation, graze more cows, increase stocking rate. But then, I guess you may get to a point where you've gone too far. So how do you know when you're at that point?
Yeah, so it's I guess the interesting thing when we go back a bit in time is that once farmers in multiple countries understood that, and we're going back quite a bit of time, that if we get the soil fertility right and we get the fencing and the water supply right, that actually we learned 60, 70 years ago, maybe in New Zealand, for instance, they learned very clearly that what we needed was more cows. More cows actually allowed you to grow and harvest more grass because they maintained quality. And it was maintained quality, allowed you to leave the pasture in ideal position to regrow, and that was those increased cows, that increased stocking rate led to more pasture production, more pasture harvest, and it's your question's so good because that's well understood. But the issue is, and it's happened in a number of countries already and can be happening here in some places, on some farms, is that where do you stop with that? Because what seems such a clear, and it is demonstrated relationship, that stocking rate has a really strong positive correlation with profit. And it's there because it has a strong correlation with pasture harvest. The issue is when's enough, and when is it too much, and so why your question I think really is so good is the problem is if you keep stepping up in stocking rates, sooner or later it's higher than's required to optimise pasture harvest, and with certainty you're going to have to bring in more supplement to maintain those cows at a sound level of milk production. And that's the point that some industries have gone to and gone past, and some farmers here will no doubt have. And the moment you do that, you've already gained anything you're going to potentially gain from increased profit from pasture harvest, and you start moving into the other area that we've talked about. We're starting to wind down the pasture percentage in the diet, and you will end up you'll end up reducing profit. You'll certainly significantly increased cost of production, and in fact there's now growing clarity and evidence around you'll actually start depressing pasture harvest, so starting to actually work against yourself for doing it. And the Australian industry is not just Australian, but some others are classic for looking at, because they have been down this path, and thinking that milk per cow was good. We thought people thinking they were doing right because they had enough cows to easily harvest what pasture did grow, but their cost of productions have gone up and have become fully uneconomic, unprofitable, and not able to compete internationally. So where is that balance? And the balance, I spent a lot of time thinking and analysing and working on this for individual farms and for industries and providing data on it, and so it's firstly the point of optimum. We'll call it optimum cost of production and profit is not a single place for an industry, or even for two farmers farming next door to each other on exactly the same land. Which I know it sounds complicated as a result, because as we started with and talking about cost of production being linked to a risk aspect, I have a higher cost of production, I carry a higher level of risk. But if milk price and other things are in my favour, I might still have a similar or higher profit. So, for instance, deciding where a business is going to sit in its mix of profit and cost of production goals as a personal one can depend on the individual, on the age of them, younger versus older stage of development. But it's still going to be the foundation is going to be linked to long-term milk. The right place or the optimum place roughly will be linked to long-term milk prices, the factors of the business. The potential of a farm or an industry to produce pasture and at what cost, and your cost potentially for growing pasture is very low. The cost of supplement, in particular concentrate. Now, Ireland without doubt has a very high cost of concentrate. Because it's a great country for growing grass and it's not a good place for growing cereal grains. Just like Australia is not good for growing grass, we've got to work a lot harder at it. We grow less of it in most places, but we're very good at growing grains. So when you see some of those factors and a whole range of other costs, what I can say, if in general, as long as it's accepted in general, is, for instance, for the industry here and farmers in general, which probably there's going to be a sweet spot, or quite a large one, which may be somewhere, in my calculations, how I calculate pasture and pasture percentage, might be somewhere between 70-75% and 80-85% pasture percentage in the diet is likely to be where you'll optimise cost of production and profit. Remembering that I'm calling as part of pasture that out-farm grass that's being conserved. So my pasture percentages might be 5 or 10% lower sounding than what the industry sometimes would talk about here. And the issue then, because of your mix of particularly very low cost of pasture and high cost of concentrate, means your increase in cost of production will start to happen very rapidly when you take out, for instance, by my calculations, until this is before the fertilizer prices all went up and everything went up. But as I'll show at the conference, between say 2015-16 and 2020, apologies, it's in US dollars because it's how I do the comparisons, but your cost might have averaged around $60 US per ton of pasture, and your concentrates in US dollars were over $400. So when you start taking out $60 feed and replacing it with $400+ feed, I could argue you shouldn't need lots of fancy analysis that I might like doing. You're just going to see those costs go up very quickly. And that's the part of the challenge here at the moment for some, because when milk price went up last year so high, it could have looked like some production system change may well still have made good money, but that was pretty much a one-off.
It's easy and tempting to press the button in the parlour to feed that little bit extra, David. You must appreciate that.
Oh, no.
But when you appeal to logic and you talk about that $60 per ton feed versus the $400 ton feed, and I suppose a comment then on that, you mentioned the price of fertiliser would have increased. Now, people are moving towards reducing the amount of fertiliser they are spreading, particularly in chemical form. But that decision when, for us, urea hit over €1,000 a tonne, people said, right, we'll claw back, or, they skipped around a fertiliser. But as you say, the evidence shows they maintained the level of concentrate, and that also had increased. I suppose a comment from the outside looking in on that.
What I've seen and heard from some of the data recorded here, I think even more accurately, the fertiliser, independently of all the regulations that you're trying to deal with at the moment, independently of that, fertiliser went down, and actually supplement and concentrates went up. So, and the comment was, and I was dealing with these same factors, exactly the same price sort of changes, of course, were happening in every country in the world. And I actually thought the best policy very clearly was no change to the nitrogen going on. And if it's independent of any regulations, that it's growing grass, it made the grass a bit more expensive. So I imagine, it's quite likely that $60 average could easily have been $100 US. Huge change. Maybe let's call it $120 US. It sounds terrible compared to 60, But on average, that $400 US a tonne concentrate in the same year, if it had stayed at $400, is complete. I mean, why would you use $400 to replace the $120? And the reality was that $400 concentrate had also gone up in price. So very many farmers did what many other countries did, something similar, but I think I'm trying to say it was very clear nitrogen was part of your production system to maintain a certain level of pasture production and pasture percentage in the diet, and that simple basis is $60, $120, $150. That same increased cost of nitrogen meant maybe that out-farm grass, that I'm calling it, that's brought back onto the farm went from $150 to $250, and I say the 400 was 450. Nothing actually changed about the dynamics. My only advice to farmers I was working with was don't waste it, of course, just redouble your efforts to use the urea and everything, which you really advise people to do every year. Just be as efficient and careful with how you apply it, so don't waste it. But unless you're going to take cows off and change your whole system, I believe the clear advice should have been maintain exactly what was planned.
And as you say, they're the principles of the farm, so they shouldn't necessarily change, particularly in relation to the ability to grow and utilise pasture. I suppose to sum up, David, I suppose you've shown us evidence that you really understand what's going on in the country, but you like our resources and our capabilities. If you were a dairy farmer in Ireland, what would be the key principles of your system? Maybe 2-3 things that would be non-negotiables every year.
Every profit or economic driver is counterintuitive, is the opposite of what the importance you would think. So that's why these business analyses are so important, because you just can't gross margin or look at something in a shallow way. And if you do what feels right, it's going to mislead you. So I break down. I want to see the breakdown of the business because I want to break it into 4 sections. Firstly, pasture production, which is linked to your pasture harvest and cost of pasture and a range of things. Production system, which we've talked a lot about these two, percentage of pasture in the diet, cost of total feed, and the two other parts of the business. So we need to try and break a business down so we know where to focus. Is labour, cost, and productivity, which is a huge one. Not nearly as important as the first two, so I need to understand how that's performing, what the cost is and what the productivity is. And the fourth block is what I'd call pure cost control. So not to do with pasture production, not to do with production system, I want some ratios about labour, cost and productivity, which includes the owner in that cost and productivity. And then I want to know about some core costs that are, and because the goal is to keep them really animal health, breeding, let's say repairs and maintenance, vehicle costs, and a range of things. And if I see those, I know where, as an individual farmer, if we talk about where to concentrate, I've come across many expert dairy farmers at pasture harvest, and they love being good at that. And actually, the weakness in their business as a result is probably somewhere else. And if you see their analysis, you can immediately say, actually, you're doing really well there, but you need to concentrate now. If you want to take the next step in how much money you're going to make, how profitable it is. And it's that, I know it sounds very profit orientated. That's true, but if you have a profitable business, you have choice in life. So that's the beauty. You have a business that's profitable and producing cash, then you have a choice. More choice around what you do with your life and how to bring up your family or do whatever else. So I want to see those 4 splits so that I can see where next to move. And so the industry here generally is strong, particularly strong on the focus on pasture harvest and the production system, but not necessarily understanding strongly where to focus more of the effort and not necessarily having enough of the analysis or the ratios in enough businesses to make sure there's not a drift away from what presently is a pretty strong situation.
And I think that links back, David, to your point at the start, running the business soundly. And, your wrap-up comment is this idea of it gives you opportunity to do what you want to do. You know what I mean? A profitable business essentially has free cash, and it gives you the power to look outside the farm business and enjoy life. I guess.
Yes.
Dairy farmers work hard enough during the week and across the year. It's also interesting, I suppose it's a great time of year to have this conversation, because we are wrapping up the season and it is time we're not as busy, we're drying off cows, take stock and look back. It's also the time of year that we complete Profit Monitor. So I suppose this is a little bit of homework for our listeners. And I do know that, dairy advisors are more than willing to help with completing the Profit Monitor. And it's just to get, I suppose, an understanding of where your cost is at, and maybe to look at benchmarking versus the average and the top. Where do you lie for individual costs? Do you want to do better? And it's to create a strategy in terms of how you will do that. And it will lead to the long-term viability of farm businesses. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. And my thanks to David Beca for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and listen on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join us next time for your Dairy Edge.